Hello everyone, today we will talk about a shocking case in world history because of the unbelievable nature of this incident. This man was Pedro Lopez. He was born after his father's death, and his mother had to sell her body to raise 13 children. Leaving home at the age of 8, Pedro survived by scavenging through trash for food and soon nurtured a deep hatred for life. Pedro was born in 1948 in the small mountain village of Santa Isabel, in western Colombia. His father had been killed in the Civil War 3 months before Pedro's birth. His mother raised 7 children alone. When Pedro was 5, the family moved to the city of El Espinal, 130 kilometers away, seeking refuge from the fighting and also income through prostitution at home. She later had 6 more children with her clients. In 1956, at just 8 years old, Pedro misbehaved with his sister and was beaten almost to death by his mother before being thrown out of the house. Pedro slept on the streets and survived by scavenging garbage. One day, while begging, Pedro was invited by a strange man to his house for dinner and a night's sleep. But there was no dinner or warm blanket. Pedro was lured into a warehouse at the end of the street and raped. A childhood engulfed in war, poverty, and violence distorted Pedro's view of life and fueled his thirst for revenge. After several months wandering the streets, the 8-year-old walked a total of 146 kilometers from El Espinal to the capital Bogotá, joining a community of thousands of homeless children. They operated in a complex network of beggars, thieves, and gangs to survive. Pedro quickly joined a gang. In 1958, at the age of 10, he was adopted by a kind couple. A happy ending seemed close, but 2 years later, Pedro was again abused, this time by a male teacher. The traumatic childhood memories and hatred resurfaced. Pedro ran away and returned to street life. He quickly gained a reputation thanks to his talent for theft, especially stealing cars. By the age of 18, Pedro was a prominent car thief in Bogotá's underworld and began training younger followers. In 1969, at 21, Pedro's car theft career ended when he was caught red-handed and sentenced to 2 years in prison. On the first day, 4 other inmates beat and raped him. The next day, smuggling a butter knife from the cafeteria, Pedro attacked each of them. Not wanting to incite further riots, the guards concluded it was self-defense and added only 2 more years to his sentence. For the remaining 4 years, he had no further problems with other inmates. Everyone feared him. Released in 1973, he drifted between Bogotá and El Espinal, occasionally visiting his mother. In 1978, Pedro went to Peru, became a drunkard, and began kidnapping, raping, and killing an average of 3 young girls each week, most aged 9 to 12. When asked about his motive, he said, "I lost my innocence at the age of 8. So I decided to do the same to as many girls as possible." One day, Pedro was caught trying to lure a 9-year-old girl into the forest. An angry group of tribesmen chased him, buried him up to his neck in sand, and suspected he was behind recent disappearances of young girls. The village chief intervened, and instead of killing him, they handed Pedro over to the police. With no evidence linking him to the disappearances, he was deported to Colombia. But instead, he crossed into Ecuador and continued his crimes. On May 5, 1979, he approached a girl selling newspapers, assaulted her, and buried her body under a bridge, covering the shallow grave with the very newspapers she had sold that day. Police conducted no investigation into her disappearance. Pedro committed further crimes across 11 provinces of Ecuador. Police assumed the missing girls were runaways and showed little interest in investigating crimes in poor communities. But on February 14, 1980, a girl disappeared while walking alone in central Ambato to visit her father at work. However, her father was not poor. He owned a chain of bakeries and was a respected businessman in the community. When he reported her missing, police were forced to pay attention. This fueled hope among parents of other missing girls, and their voices grew louder in the community and the press. A few weeks later, floods exposed the remains of 4 girls buried in various locations along a river near Ambato. That was when police realized they were dealing with a serial killer. The city went on high alert. On March 8, 1980, the wealthy girl's body was also found at a farm on the outskirts of town. The following day, at the town fair, Pedro attempted to lure a 12-year-old fruit seller helping her mother. An act that might normally have gone unnoticed now drew attention amidst the recent murders. When the girl screamed in fear, the crowd chased Pedro across the market, beat him, and handed him to the police. Pedro denied all accusations. To gather information, the police chief placed an undercover officer in Pedro's cell, posing as a fellow rapist. It took several days to befriend Pedro and nearly a month to extract confessions. Pedro told his cellmate that since arriving in Ecuador, he had killed an average of 3 girls each week, all over the country. In a later press interview, the police chief said, "During those 27 days, I hardly slept for fear he would strangle me." He boasted about crimes beyond my worst nightmares. Eventually, the officer became too traumatized to continue and requested to be removed. Pedro confessed to kidnapping, raping, and murdering 110 girls in Ecuador from April 1979 to March 1980, 140 girls in Colombia from 1973 to 1977, and more than 50 girls in Peru in late 1978. In total, Pedro confessed to killing more than 300 children over 7 years. Police didn't know what to do with Pedro. The numbers he claimed were too large. They thought he might just be a madman making up stories. But after further interrogations, police asked Pedro to lead them to the burial sites. That would determine once and for all whether the madman was telling the truth. Over 6 weeks, Pedro calmly led police to one site after another, sometimes several in a single day. In total, they discovered 57 bodies, proving Pedro was telling the truth. At trial on July 31, 1981, Pedro was convicted of 110 murders in Ecuador. But at that time, Ecuadorian law did not allow consecutive sentences, and multiple charges for the same crime were considered unconstitutional. This meant that whether Pedro killed 1 or 110 victims, the maximum sentence was 16 years, equivalent to just 3 months per victim. Pedro would be released by the age of 50. Authorities admitted, "Yes, it sounds strange, but that is our law." During his 16 years in prison, Pedro swore he would continue killing once released. On August 31, 1994, he was freed 2 years early for good behavior. His release enraged parents, who protested constantly. Public pressure later led to raising the maximum sentence for rape to 25 years. Pedro was never prosecuted for any crimes in Peru or Colombia. In 1995, he was diagnosed as insane and committed for 2 years to a psychiatric hospital in Bogotá. After his release in early 1998, Pedro returned to El Espinal to visit his mother, demanded inheritance money, threatened to burn her house, and then left. That was the last time anyone saw him.